Welcome to literary and jury charge practice. We'll start out with just a bit of jury charge. A little warm-up. Ready? Here we go. The law contemplates that different factors may be given different weights or values by different jurors. Thus, you may find that one mitigating factor outweighs all aggravating factors combined, or that aggravating factors proved do not, standing alone, justify the imposition of a sentence of death. Similarly, you may instead find that a single aggravating factor sufficiently outweighs all mitigating factors combined so as to justify a sentence of death. Any one of you is free to decide that a death sentence should not be imposed so long as, based on the evidence and your sense of justice, you conclude that the proven aggravating factors do not sufficiently outweigh the mitigating factors such that the death penalty should be imposed. Each juror is to individually decide what weight or value is to be given to any particular aggravating or mitigating factor in the decision-making process. Bear in mind, of course, that in order to find that a sentence of death is appropriate for a particular count, the jurors must all agree in their conclusion that the aggravating factor or factors proven as to that count sufficiently outweigh any mitigating factors found, or in the absence of any mitigating factors, that the aggravating factors alone are sufficient to call for a sentence of death. In the event that you all find as to all the capital counts that the aggravating factor or factors found to exist sufficiently outweigh the mitigating factor or factors found to exist, or in the absence of any mitigating factors that the aggravating factor or factors alone are sufficient to justify a sentence of death, then you will indicate that in Section 6 of the verdict form. In the event that you all find that a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of release is the right sentence for Mr. Saar for all of the capital counts, then you would indicate that in Section 6, which is the second option. In the event that you all find that some of the capital counts for some of the capital counts that the aggravating factor or factors found to exist sufficiently outweigh the mitigating factor or factors found to exist, or in the absence of mitigating factors, the aggravating factor or factors are alone sufficient to justify death with respect to these counts, please indicate also in Section 6 and then identify those counts by number. In the event that the jury is unable to reach a unanimous verdict in favor of a death sentence or in favor of a life sentence for any of the capital counts, please so indicate in Section 6 of the verdict form. Before you reach any conclusion based on a lack of agreement on any count, you should continue your discussions until you are fully satisfied that no further discussion will lead to a unanimous decision. After you have completed your sentence determination in Section 6, regardless of what the determination was, continue on to Section 7 and complete the certificate regarding the determination of evidence. As I instructed you at the beginning of the penalty phase, in your consideration whether the death sentence is appropriate, you must not consider the race, color, religious beliefs, national origin, or sex of either Mr. Saar or of the victims. You are not to return a sentence of death unless you would return a sentence of death for the crime in question without regard to the race, color, religious beliefs, national origin, or sex of either Mr. Saar or any victim. To emphasize the importance of this consideration, Section 8 of the verdict form contains a certification statement each juror should carefully read when you've completed your deliberations. Each juror should carefully read the statement and sign your name in the appropriate place if the statement accurately reflects the manner in which each of you reached your individual decision. So that is the conclusion of my instructions at this stage. We'll have some further few things to say later. We will now turn to the closing statements by counsel, and when they have finished, I will have some final issues to discuss with you. As we did before, the order of the closing arguments is the government will proceed first, followed by the defendant, followed by a brief rebuttal by the government. Again, at least I think perhaps we should actually take a short break, very short. All right, we're ready for the government's main closing argument. We will stop there and do some literary practice. and then get back to this closing argument. So we will carry on with our article about captioning. Ready? Here we go. I agree with everyone about the audio and tech challenges. I'd add that knowing how to use the growing variety of captioning platforms and being able to troubleshoot quickly is challenging. For remote jobs, I may have to use any combination of Stream Text, YouTube Live, Adobe Connect, Blackboard, Collaborate, Zoom, iCap, or dial-up encoders, and many on-site jobs are now asking you to stream the captions online while also projecting. What practical advice do you have for anyone who is a captioner or who wants to become one? Jones. Only one word comes to mind at the moment: prep. Milkowitz. I'm not sure if I have any words or advice for other captioners at this point. For people who would like to hone their skills and transition from court reporting, I would say it's vital that you have a good dictionary, obviously, and I personally believe in the prefix-suffix way of thinking. I know not everybody ascribes to that, but it has worked for me. My mentor, Gail Hardiman, FAPR, RDR, CRR, CRC, CRI, helped me make the transition to captioning and led me down that road. It took a while for the whole prefix-suffix thing to sink in for some reason, but when it did, I just took off and never looked back. Also, it's critical to have several alphabet dictionaries and a good way to write your numbers. Also important, ask questions. I think this community is so helpful, and we don't mind a bit if somebody asks questions. We are all willing to help, and that's one thing I love about our small community. Lundberg, be ready to roll with the punches. Things can change so fast. Technical problems can throw you off your game, but if you are prepared and ready, you will be fine. Build your dictionary. If you are captioning TV, you will hear anything and everything. If you are captioning a class, look for words and dictionaries to help you, and back up your dictionaries. You don't want to lose prep from a Biology 101 class or a med school class or English 101. I have never found a day of dictionary building that didn't help me get better. I like that Tammy brought up numbers. I do use the number bar, and I'll use it with EU to double or reverse numbers, so I can write 51 or 55 in one stroke, for example. None. Really get to know the different features of your software and never stop building your dictionaries. Foley. Always have your backup computer equipment nearby, updated and ready to go. Turn off automatic Windows updates and install them manually when you have the time. If something goes wrong and there's a chance you can't fix it immediately, don't wait to contact the agency. Let's get back to some jury charge. Actually, this one is now going to be the closing argument. All right, here we go. There's a certain clarity that comes to you when you are close to death. Remember the testimony of Jeff Blake and Sid Crane. Even as they lay bleeding on that sidewalk on Boylston Street, they made peace with death. As the defendant lay bleeding in that boat, he too made peace with death. In this moment of clarity, he wrote what he thought would be his lasting statement. He wrote, "Now, I don't like killing innocent people, but in this case it is allowed because Americans need to be punished. No remorse, no apology." Those are the words of a terrorist convinced that he has done the right thing. He felt justified in killing and maiming and seriously injuring innocent men, women, and children. I want to start back on Boylston Street, back where the carnage began. Picture the scene on Boylston just before the first blast. It's a beautiful sunny Patriots Day. It's 2:45 p.m. and the defendant walks up. He walks up past the Forum restaurant, sees how crowded it is, and decides that's the place to put his bomb. He placed it there because his goal was to murder and mutilate. He wanted to murder as many people as possible. When he looked up, what did he see? He saw that he had placed that bomb about 4 feet behind a row of children: 6-year-old Jane Richard, 8-year-old Martin Richard, 11-year-old Aaron Hearn, 12-year-old Henry Richard. He was right here. The children were right there, but seeing them didn't stop him. He didn't pick up that backpack, and he didn't move it. He didn't care if he killed them along with everyone else, because he had already decided that killing innocents was justified. In fact, killing innocents was the whole point. It's the way you terrorize an entire population. The more vulnerable and unsuspecting the victim, the more terrifying the murder. The defendant picked the Boston Marathon, he picked the Forum restaurant, and he chose to remain there right by that tree because it was the best way he could punish his perceived enemies. The defendant put the backpack down behind those children, and he waited. That was 20 seconds. He waited almost 12 times that long before giving his brother the go-ahead and then detonating his own bomb. Remember that Alan Hearn said, the father of 11-year-old Aaron Hearn, he said he was helpless trying to save Aaron. Remember what Steve Wolf said? He was terrified and helpless as little Leo was carried away, little Leo screaming for mommy and daddy, being handed off to strangers. Steve Wolf didn't know if he would live or die, and he didn't know if he would live to ever see Leo again. These fathers were helpless. They were helpless in saving the lives of their own children because of that defendant. This is what terrorism looks like. It's Martin Richard bleeding on the ground in agony while his mother bends over him, injured in one eye, and begs him to stay alive, saying, please, Martin, please, Martin. It's Liz Lou screaming in pain as she dies on that street while her friend Dan tries to hold her organs inside. It's Chris Camp burned all over her body, filled with shrapnel, with smoke coming out of her mouth. And it's Sean Collins, a loving son and dedicated public servant, sitting in his cruiser with 3 bullet holes in his head, dying as his own blood pools in that car seat. And it's nearly 20 other people staring in shock at their mangled and ruined limbs when just moments before they were fine. It's not just the dead and the wounded who were injured by the defendant's crimes. Others suffered unspeakable pain and will do so for the rest of their lives. Bill Richard told you that he had to choose between saving Jane, who was near certain death, or going back and seeing Martin in his last moments of life. Do you think that memory ever goes away? That pain ever goes away? The defense will ask you to value the defendant's life, but he did not value the lives of his victims, not even the lives of children. He killed randomly to make a political statement, and he placed no value on the lives and didn't care for a second what impact his actions and his killings would have on so many other innocent family members and friends. His actions have earned him a sentence of death. There is so much death and loss and devastation in this case, it's hard to know where to begin. The defendant planted a bomb that led to painful eulogies and terrifying memories. Surviving family members were left to attend to funerals and live lives with bittersweet memories of those lost forever and painful reminders of what could have been. You heard how Chris Camp was her dad's princess. She was the light in his life. He told you that she would call him every day. Now that light is out and no phone call will ever come. Her brother told you how the family got word that Chris was still alive and at the hospital. Finally, some good news on that awful day. Only it turned out it was Karen Waters who was alive. Chris was dead. You heard that her dad fainted when he heard that news. 2 years later, Bill still feels the loss of his sister, and his son feels the loss of an amazing aunt. Sean Collins was the moral compass in the family. Now he is gone forever. His brother told you that Sean loved helping people, and as Andrew said, there will always be a cloud over family events forever, or a cloud over the family tailgates at the Patriots games. Joe Rogers will never be able to go to another game with Sean. This is Sean's graduation. Mr. Rogers told you the happiest day of Sean's life. He was murdered while performing that job. Even to this date, the pain and suffering and loss is too much to bear for that family. Sean's murder caused his family a new world of pain. Joe Rogers told you how his wife can no longer go to work after seeing Sean murdered. She suffers from PTSD and could not even get out of bed for 2 months after Sean's murder. Sean's mother cried the entire weekend of the second anniversary of his death, and Easter will never be the same for that family. If you remember, that was the last time the family got together before April 18th, 2013. Chief Fowler told you that one word describes Sean Collins' character. Now that character is gone, and 2 years later the grief still remains. Liz Lou's aunt, Aunt Helen, told you that her parents were too devastated to come to the United States at first when they got the news. Liz was their only child, their future. That future ended on April 15th, 2013. She was her father's jolly elf. She was the beautiful nerd. Liz's father read a poem at her memorial service. You heard it here in court. There will be no bombs or terrorist attacks in its path. In tears, we hear you say, "Be forever young." Dear Mom and Dad, don't cry. I love you. If there is an afterlife, I will be your daughter again. Her dad. Her father said, "She's gone. How can our living go on?" So unbelievably sad and yet so true. Their pain will never go away. Bill Richard knew immediately that there was no chance for Martin. He saw his little boy's severely damaged body. He embraced his son Henry for a moment and then told Henry, "You have to help me find Jane." After finding Jane, Bill Richard made sure she got the help she needed. Denise Richard was left with Martin for the final moments of his life. Martin's body was then covered by a tablecloth on Boylston Street. Those are the lasting images Denise Richard has for the rest of her life. And think back to what Bill Richard said about telling Jane about her brother's death. Jane was still in surgery, coming in and out of consciousness, and each time she was awake, she would ask, "How is Martin?" And each time they had to tell her Martin was dead. We'll get back to our literary practice. Ready? Here we go. Everyone has experienced one of those days when the writing just doesn't flow. How do you deal with mistakes when you're striving for 100%? Milkowitz, my first big mistake is the one that stands out in my mind, and it's kind of a funny one. There was a story on C-sections and where the incision is now below the bikini line, etc. So the way I write bikini is very similar to the way I write Bill Clinton. So, yep, you guessed it. The incision is now below the Bill Clinton line instead of bikini line. It was right during the Monica Lewinsky scandal, too. I was horrified. Now I laugh, though, because it's a good story to tell. Indeed, we do all have just bad days writing. It can be fatigue, or with me, it is just that I'm not focusing and concentrating on the job at hand. Instead, I am thinking of everything else I have to do when I'm done captioning. And then I also have just bad writing days. A good friend of mine shared something with me that he likes to do, and that is to start every new half hour fresh. Meaning, if you had mistakes, untranslates, or just were unhappy with your performance the previous half hour, well, now you have a clean slate to try once again for that perfection for which we all strive. I like that, and that's what I try to do. It's kind of like the game of baseball. You have to pick yourself up and move on after a bad game. You can't dwell on the mistake. I try to remind myself, though, that my bad days are still a good day for those who are receiving my captions. Our true consumers understand that we make mistakes and they appreciate us anyway. I like what Josh said about how we don't just type, but we process information with the goal of readability and equal access. I'm stealing that, Josh. Fully, I second everything Tammy said. Oh, I've had a few blunders. The best thing I've learned on the job is to be vigilant about reading as you write so you can catch mistakes before they go out on the air, and also accepting that mistakes will happen and to be ready to correct them without panicking. All right, we will stop there, and that will conclude our literary and jury charge practice.